of the hour on a Friday, and we are coming on the air with more of that record-breaking heat. Tens of millions of us all under extreme weather warnings. We're going to take a look on the ground and get the forecast for what it's going to be looking like over the coming days and how we hope to stay cool. Plus, President Biden's doctors say his symptoms are now improving after his COVID diagnosis. But while there's not a lot of concern about his health, there are red flags that could mean, or what it could mean for him politically. And we'll look at what's next after the final January 6th hearing. For now, after new details now about how Mike Pence's security detail feared for their lives, and the never-before-seen outtakes of former President Trump's speech the next day. What we're hearing from voters in a key battleground state. Plus, health officials in a New York City suburb are giving out the polio vaccine after the country's first reported case in nearly a decade. What you need to know to stay safe. And it's not in the headlines as much these days, but the baby formula shortage, remember that? It's still very real, even though there's been nearly 20 flights from overseas loaded with formula. What we're hearing from parents in tonight's Original. Plus, Facebook is scrambling to lure people back by making the app look more like TikTok. We'll tell you about that and show you a side-by-side, whether you like it or not, coming up later in the show. Hey there, I'm Tom Costello. I'm in for Hallie today. And on this Friday evening, if you were hoping that this heat wave would let up in time for you to enjoy your weekend, think again. We've got some bad news here. Tens of millions of us this weekend, we're going to be really suffering through the hottest one so far this year. Temperatures climbing, especially high in the Northeast. 73 million people under heat alerts today, from California to the plains to D.C., where I am. Remember that song, The Heat Is On? Yeah, the heat is on. We could see 100-plus degrees here for the first time in 6 years here in D.C. New York City could see its longest heat wave since 2013. City officials there announced today that they were shortening their annual triathlon on Sunday to keep the racers, the volunteers, and the spectators safe. In Boston, they had to scrap the event altogether. It's now been rescheduled for the end of August, when hopefully things cool down. Folks there say they are definitely feeling the heat. Listen to this.
It's a strain on our human body. As I'm sitting here sweating, sweat's pouring down, and the sunscreen's going in my eyes.
Yeah, that hurts. Okay, further west in New Mexico, record heat is literally drying out the Rio Grande, pointing to just how noticeably the water level there has dropped in just the past week or so. We're going to get the forecast from Bill Cairns in just a bit, but we're going to begin now with George Solis, who is in Philadelphia, where things are expected to get even hotter, right? George, 100 degrees or so for the first time in 10 years?
Yeah, that's right, Tom. And this is one of the few places that people in Philadelphia have been coming all day to try and beat the heat. It's shade right now, which is incredible. And these spray pads that are in front of me, occasionally they will shoot up about 7 feet of water from the ground, cooling off many children, some that you may be able to see here in front of the live shot. The city is urging people to take this heat health emergency seriously. They are encouraging people to stay hydrated, stay indoors when possible, and of course find those cooling centers if they are nowhere near AC or someplace where they can cool off immediately. As you mentioned, the city is bracing for some particularly scorching weather. And right now, we did speak to some people in the area who are trying to find ways to beat the heat. Take a listen.
I would say beating the afternoon heat. So in the morning, I feel like it's the prime time, and just finding good shade and water, and then you're good to go.
So you probably won't find you guys out here later this afternoon?
Probably not. I'll leave before 12.
Staying cool is a must. Staying hydrated is a must. If you could get your coconut water, get you some coconut water or regular water, just to keep yourself.
Yeah, and Tom, this is certainly one of those cases where people were hoping for a little bit of heat this summer, and of course they got their wish and then some. And again, city health officials really urging people to take this heat health emergency seriously. Tom?
Well, that one guy behind you knew exactly how to beat the heat, George. I don't know if you're aware, but we got a little bit of a striptease show behind you. So officials there are so worried, though, about this weather that they actually have extended the heat health emergency, right? So what are you hearing about the precautions that they want to take and how they're going to try to keep people safe, especially people who don't have the AC, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that heat health emergency was actually something that was only supposed to last a day or two, but because of the extreme heat, that's actually been extended through the weekend. So what that means is that the city will not shut off any utilities for people that may be delinquent on a bill. Those cooling centers, crucial right now, are open for those people that may not have access to AC, and outreach for the homeless. That's key, too, to make sure that everyone that is on the streets finds a cool place and gets some help they needed so they are not out in these brutal conditions. And as for our little streaker on the set here, well, they've been taken off. Again, maybe the heat too much for them at this point. But again, things, at least right now in the shade, cooling off. So there is a little bit of light at the end of that tunnel. But again, the weekend, that is when things are supposed to get pretty serious. So again, very important to take it seriously. Tom?
All right. You really can't blame anybody. All right, George, thank you very much. All right, let's now go to Bill Cairns. Bill, we know this weekend is going to be brutal for a lot of people. When are we going to see some relief?
We'll see some relief. But, Tom, you have to admit, when you're 4 years old, you're realizing you're cooler if you're not wearing your suit, right? I mean, that's kind of like something my son would have done.
Every 4-year-old can relate. Absolutely.
Yeah, so, this weekend, there'll be a lot of people trying to do whatever they can to cool off. I mean, it's been focused right in the middle of the country, and now it has shifted towards the East Coast. And it's been humid, too, so you can't really win unless you get some rain to cool you off. So this is kind of the peak heating of the day. Right now, if you step outside, remember, these are in the shade. D.C., it feels like 97. Wilmington, 103. Little Rock's 104. You get the idea. It's been like this day after day, and we're going to suffer this weekend. We've actually just increased the numbers. Late in the afternoon, we get updates from the National Weather Service. It was 73 million. Now we're up to 84 million people. We've included some people around the Philadelphia area, Maryland. Also, we've expanded up into areas of Iowa and central Illinois. So, again, this weekend, it will be exceptionally hot. Saturday, hundreds. You can go from San Antonio. You can drive north all the way to Omaha. Everyone will be at least 100 degrees. On the East Coast, I-95 from Boston, you can go from Portland, Maine, to all the way to Miami. Everyone will be in the 90s. And, of course, it's a little more humid, so it'll feel like 100. And then into next week, the hottest day for D.C., New York, Boston, Philly. It looks like on Sunday. Right now, we're forecasting 99 for D.C., so very close to the century mark for the first time in that 6 years. The cool-off is with thunderstorms Monday night. That'll be the key. But record highs are expected in many cities in the Northeast, including areas like Newark that could be up to 100. And, Tom, this is the map you don't want to see. For the end of July, we continue hot on the East Coast and all the way through the Gulf.
All right, buddy. Thank you very much, Bill Cairns. Let's now go to Washington, where the message right now from the White House on President Biden is that he's all good and getting better. He is quarantining, of course, after testing positive for COVID. In a letter today, his doctor says his symptoms have improved. He had a 99.4-degree fever last night, and he's taking Tylenol along with Paxlovid. Here's what we just now heard from COVID coordinator Dr. Ashish Jha in just the last hour.
It's great to see the president doing better. He's doing better because he is vaccinated, he is boosted, he's getting treatments.
Well, the White House wants to show the president is doing just fine. Look at this event he's joining virtually to talk about gas prices, which are dropping, and a video of him signing a bill that would address the baby formula shortage, messed up in both cases. And just in case, First Lady Jill Biden will be staying at the family home in Wilmington this weekend through at least Tuesday. She continues to test negative and shows no symptoms. Mike Memoli is outside the White House for us. Mike, the message here is really that they're keeping calm and carrying on, right? Because the president seems to be doing just fine.
That's what the White House is really trying to emphasize at this point, Tom. And as White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain put it yesterday, he really hopes that this is a teachable moment for the country. And he kind of means that in two different ways. First, they are warning about the transmissibility of this new BA.5 variant. They want the country not to let their guard down. So they've been encouraging people in this moment to get vaccinated if you haven't been already. But they also are talking about it in a different respect. Yes, they want to show the president at work, able to function normally, even with those mild symptoms. As one White House official put it to me as we were texting today, hashtag normalize COVID. They want to take credit for the fact that we are in a very different place as a nation now in July of 2022 compared to October of 2020, the last time a president of the United States contracted COVID. You can, with the treatments available, and if you are vaccinated, be just like the president, as they're pointing out, working today. And for the first time, as we've been seeing these glimpses of the president, even with his diagnosis, working from home, we saw him for the first time over live video getting briefed by his economic team, admitting, yes, that he actually feels much better than he sounds, and he did sound pretty rough, I have to say, Tom. Also given a little bit of a thumbs up, though, as reporters tried to shout questions at him through a Zoom screen, a kind of a new frontier in White House reporting today.
All right. Well, you and your White House team also have some reporting on how this diagnosis is kind of throwing a wrench into the president's midterm push, right?
Yeah, Tom, when you look at over the last 3 months, at a time when the president's approval rating has been dipping home mainly about domestic issues, the president's schedule had been dominated with foreign policy. He traveled to Asia, he traveled to Europe, he traveled to the Middle East, and he had a number of foreign leaders visiting Washington and California as well for that Summit of the Americas. So this exact week was the moment at which the White House was supposed to make that big pivot, get the president out on the campaign trail. He was supposed to have his first political rally of the midterms in Florida on Monday. So this is really coming at an inopportune time on that front. But also, Tom, of course, as the president's age has been sort of one of those factors we've seen in polls, with Democrats even saying they might want somebody else at the top of the ticket in 2024. This is just a reminder at 79 of his vulnerability as the oldest president of the United States, something that's not good for the White House at the moment.
Okay, Mike, thank you. Mike Memoli at the White House. You know, it took less than 3 hours for a jury in Washington, D.C. today to find former Trump White House advisor Steve Bannon guilty on 2 counts of criminal contempt of Congress for ignoring a subpoena from the January 6th committee to produce documents and appear for a deposition about what he knew about the events leading up to January 6th. Here's what he said after the verdict.
We may have lost a battle here today, but we're not going to lose this war. The prosecutor missed one very important phrase, right? I stand with Trump and the Constitution, and I will never back off that, ever.
Well, the prosecution used closing arguments to say that Bannon chose his allegiance to Donald Trump over compliance with the law, while Bannon's lawyers questioned whether the rules were followed when the subpoena was issued on the political motives of prosecutors and their witnesses. Bannon himself waived his right to testify, and his defense team decided not to present a case to the jury. Now, he faces a maximum of a year in prison for each one of the counts. Joining me now is Ryan Riley for NBC News. Ryan, the jury took almost no time in convicting him, but is this at all surprising given the defense never even put up a case, never put up a defense, really?
It's not, and when you factor in time to, eat lunch and pick a foreman, it's pretty narrow, amount of time that they actually spent deliberating this case. But that's essentially what the government tried to argue here, is that this is a very straightforward, simple case. Steve Bannon was required to show up at this date and time and was required to turn over documents. He did neither, and he's in violation of these 2. He's in contempt of Congress twice, and that's essentially what they made the case for. And apparently, the jury agreed with him here. They saw it as a very simple, straightforward case, and in a matter of hours, he was convicted.
All right, talk to us about the next steps here, though. What can we expect him to be sentenced? And his team is saying that they're filing an appeal, right? So what does that look like?
Yeah, they've been really creating a record for that appeal throughout the entire trial. So even when there were issues that the judge had already dealt with, they sometimes came to this podium and would lay out why they are objecting once again, or they made new motions just to basically lay out some paperwork so that then when they brought this case forward to an appeal, that they would have a record to look back on. And I think that's basically what they're setting up for the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals here. But sentencing will probably still go forward. There's always a chance, I guess, that the judge could stay the sentencing, but in all likelihood, there's probably going to be progress. He'll go forward and get sentenced, and he's looking at a 30-day mandatory minimum here, which is, I think, probably the range we should be looking at. Theoretically, it could bump up to a year, perhaps 2 years if it wasn't concurrently, but more likely is probably going to be around 30 days what he'll end up serving, because that's the mandatory minimum.
Okay, but clear something up here. Bannon said that he was willing to testify in front of the January 6th committee. So does it seem likely at all that he would still do that after this conviction, or would there be any benefit now for him to go in front of the committee and do this?
There would be very little benefit. I would expect that it probably wouldn't go forward because basically the committee would have to start this entire process over again, right? And they're also sort of narrowing down the window of what the committee's work is doing. They have those 3 hearings set for September, but they're on a pretty tight deadline. And given how long it took to get to this point, you know, where Steve Bannon was held in contempt of Congress and convicted of contempt of Congress, that's a long trajectory if you were to restart that process all over again. So I wouldn't think it would be likely that we'll be hearing testimony from Steve Bannon through the committee, especially with all of the outlandish, over-the-top statements that Steve Bannon has made about the committee this week.
Yeah, Ryan, thank you very much. Ryan Riley in the D.C. newsroom. The dust is settling on season 1 of those January 6th hearings, and lawmakers are already laying out plans for season 2 with more hearings in September once Congress is back from its summer break. We're going to look now at what we learned first last night. Let's begin with this timeline of exactly what former President Trump was doing from 1:10 p.m. when he ended his speech to 187 minutes later when he tweets at the rioters to go home and go in peace. We're learning from the committee that Mr. Trump spent most of that time watching Fox News, that he refused to call law enforcement or the Pentagon to help with the situation at the Capitol. We heard from witnesses backing up ex-White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson on Trump's attempt to force his way to the Capitol. And we got frightening new details about how worried Vice President Mike Pence's security detail was actually during the attack.
It was disturbing. I don't like talking about it, but there were calls to say goodbye to family members, so on and so forth. It was getting, for whatever the reason was on the ground, the VP detail thought that this was about to get very ugly.
There's also the striking side-by-side of Republican Senator Josh Hawley before the attack, raising his fist to the rioters in support, afterward running from them in the halls of the Capitol. And a look at Mr. Trump himself and outtakes from his speech one day after the attack, where he still refused to admit that he had lost, just as he is doing today.
But this election is now over. Congress has certified the results. I don't want to say the election's over. I just want to say Congress has certified the results without saying the election's over, okay?
Again, those are the outtakes. We're going to hear from voters and a sitting senator with Guad Venegas in just a minute, but we'll start now with Hallie Rafa on Capitol Hill. So, Hallie, after 1,000 witness interviews, nearly 100 subpoenas, 150,000 documents, the committee is saying that there's still more coming in September. What else do they want to know? What do we expect them to show?
Yeah, Tom, well, we've seen over the last few months how really the deeper the committee digs into this probe, the more witnesses come forward with more information, the more revelations that surface, and really the further that the timeline gets pushed back for the end of this investigation, for this final report to be published from the committee. Take, for example, Cassidy Hutchinson, where this investigation stood just a few weeks ago before we heard from Hutchinson, which led to Cipollone's testimony, which is now leading to all these revelations and controversy about the Secret Service and these deleted text messages. So the committee says they're going to take the next month, really keep tabs and inventory on what they already have, what they still need, what they plan to look further into. And they say that it's really possible that we'll hear more Secret Service testimony in future hearings, possibly even more information on what we learned about last night, those missing White House call logs. And we know that former President Trump, during those 187 minutes that between the end of his speech on the ellipse and when he finally issued that video statement, he was calling senators in a last-ditch effort to delay the certification of those results. The committee members are likely to want to know which exact senators those were, because those missing call logs are not recoverable. So there's still a lot of work that the committee needs to be done, but they know they still have a very tight timeline here with the November midterm elections, Tom.
You know, I was struck by that sound that we heard from this official talking about how concerned members of the vice president's security detail were at the time. And the Secret Service has faced a lot of scrutiny. We heard from one of the committee members who's looking into that.
Yeah, we heard from Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren last night, who said that several Secret Service agents involved in the presidential motorcade after this speech on the ellipse with the former president have lawyered up already. Listen to what she told us last night.
Some of the officers who said they'd be coming and talking under oath, they have not come in, and they've recently retained private counsel, which is unusual, but they have a right to do that. So we'll see.
So the reason Congresswoman Lofgren is saying that this is unusual is because technically in their official capacity, these Secret Service agents are entitled to attorneys from the Department of Homeland Security because the Secret Service agency falls under that umbrella. So the committee is saying this is a little suspicious. This doesn't really pass the smell test here. They want to look further into this. They want more information about those deleted text messages that we know there's now a Inspector General of the DHS criminal probe into possible criminal charges at hand here. They want to know more about possibly the Secret Service agents that were with the former vice president after we heard that shocking and chilling video and audio last night over those agents calling their families, saying goodbye to their families in real fear of their lives. So there's so much more information that the committee wants to know as far as these threads relating to the Secret Service, Tom.
All right, Ali Rafa, who is on Capitol Hill. Thank you, Ali. Let's go to Guad Venegas. He's in Sparks, Nevada, a key swing area of a key swing state. Easy for me to say. Guad, you just got a few minutes with Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, who's running for re-election this year. And she talked about the hearings, but it's not really her focus right now, right?
Tom, right. We focused on some of the issues that are affecting the people in Nevada. People here very upset because of inflation, the cost of gasoline, the house prices going up in places like Nevada. But we did get into the hearings. This is part of the conversation that I had with Catherine Cortez Masto when it comes to the hearing last night.
I saw a police officer literally dousing his eyes out with water because he had been pepper sprayed. And I saw what happened and who was there. And quite honestly, to me, it is a choice between what we see here and those who incite this insurrection versus those who are going to stand up for law enforcement and stand up for our democracy.
You know, for someone like Catherine Cortez Masto going into the midterms, what we can take from these hearings is how will voters react to this, right? Is this going to be one of their priorities when it comes to deciding in the coming midterm elections for someone like Catherine Cortez Masto, who's looking to be reelected? What kind of issues are going to be top mind for some of these voters in places like Nevada, Tom?
Yeah, I also understand that you talked as well to a self-described nonpartisan voter. You watched the hearing with this person, getting reaction in real time. He seemed pretty disturbed by what he saw.
Correct. He was very disturbed by what he saw. You know, we wanted to pick his brain and talk to somebody who he had met in the past in one of our previous trips to see what he thought or how he felt when it comes to Donald Trump before this hearing and how he felt after. He told us that it basically reinforced what he already said he knew or thought about Donald Trump. Here's part of the conversation with him.
I think, you know, he should definitely not be allowed to run for president again. I do think he should be charged because I think he definitely had a very direct, you know, impact and the action of those people. He encouraged it. He decided not to take action.
Now, Tom, the key thing with someone like him who's a nonpartisan voter is that although he's very upset of what he's heard during these hearings, this doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to vote for the Democrats in the next election. So we'll have to wait and see how all of this can affect those midterm elections, Tom.
Do you get any sense whether his sentiments match up with other voters where you are there in Nevada?
You know, when it comes to Donald Trump, they do. We've been talking to Republican, Democrat, and nonpartisan voters in Nevada for the past few months. And it seems like when it comes to Donald Trump, most of them, the ones we've spoken to, have already made up their mind whether it is to support that there was election fraud, a lot of the Republicans here, or the nonpartisan Democrats who say they think Donald Trump was responsible for the insurrection, and who said they already made up their mind when it comes to Donald Trump. But here's the key thing. A lot of these nonpartisan nonpartisans and the Democrat voters do tell us that what they think about Donald Trump here in Nevada won't necessarily, especially more with the nonpartisan voters, that won't necessarily affect the way they will vote in the midterm elections, because to people in Nevada, there's other issues that are very important. Again, the prices of housing, the gas prices, all of inflation, and issues that are directly affecting them right now, Tom.
All right, Guad, thank you. Guad Venegas, who's in Nevada for us. The United Nations is calling today's new deal between Russia and Ukraine to finally start exporting Ukrainian grain a, quote, extraordinary achievement. The agreement, negotiated in Turkey with the UN, is essentially a ceasefire along certain shipping routes. Ukrainian pilot vessels will actually lead ships through minefields in and out of Ukrainian ports. Ukraine is one of the biggest grain exporters in the world, but the invasion blocked shipments going out. So the price of food has gone way up, pushing millions of people deeper into food insecurity. Ali Russi is still on the job and on the ground in Ukraine. Ali, tell us more about this deal, how it got done, and how it's going to work.
Hi, Tom. Well, it took several months of quite stringent negotiation in Turkey to get the deal done, but finally it was signed. And interestingly, Tom, it's a mirror agreement. It means that the Ukrainians and the Russians didn't sign the same document. They signed a document with the Turks and the UN because Kyiv didn't want to sign a document with Moscow out of principle. But now that it has been done, these cargo ships, these grain ships, will be able to leave 3 Ukrainian ports, Chernamorsk, Pivdani, and Odessa, and then from there they can go into the Bosphorus. The whole plan will be overseen by a joint commission based in Istanbul. There'll be monitors from the UN there and from the Turks, and they will be inspecting a lot of those ships to make sure contraband, mainly weapons, don't come back into Ukraine, because that's a specification the Russians had. The Russians wanted these ships to be escorted by their navy, but that was a deal breaker for all sides involved there. So they are going to travel out alone. The UN and the Ukrainians said that these ships can go through these areas without having the areas demined. But as you mentioned, there will be a Ukrainian pilot with them to guide them through routes where there aren't any mines. But it is going to open up a lot of grain that's needed across the world. There's about 20 million tons of Ukrainian grain trapped in silos here that really need to get to some of the most desperate parts of the world. So it really was a very timely deal to be made.
Yeah, I mean, we've said this many times. Ukraine is a breadbasket for so many countries. Any sense on how soon some of that food will start moving into these people's homes, especially in Africa, for example? I think Bangladesh is hit hard. How soon will they start getting relief?
Well, the UN said it could start as early as tomorrow. They're trying to put plans together to get some cargo ships out tomorrow to get these in these very desperately places that need these grain very, very desperately. The plan is to get about 5 million metric tons of grain out a month. And this deal is being made over a 120-day period. So that would pretty much account for all the grain that's stuck here in Ukraine to get out over a 4-month period. And as you mentioned, some of the world's poorest countries are depending on this. You know, people have been taken to the brink of starvation because of the lack of grain coming out of here. I mean, last year, Tom, Ukrainian grain fed 400 million people. But since the beginning of this war, it's all been stuck here and unable to move. So as we were saying, this is a very much needed time for it to go.
Yeah, a real global food emergency there. Ali, thank you very much. Coming up, Congressman Lee Zeldin is back on the campaign trail today after being attacked during an event late yesterday. What the New York candidate for governor is saying about the person who rushed him on stage. Plus, the singer of Hit Me With Your Best Shot, remember that? She says she will not perform the song anymore. How attacks in America have led to her decision. Back now, and U.S. Congressman and Republican candidate for New York Governor Lee Zeldin tonight is criticizing New York's cashless bail law after a man who attacked him at a campaign event on Thursday was released almost immediately. Zeldin, who was uninjured, told reporters he's ramping up his security for the rest of the campaign, and he thanks his running mate for helping to take down the attacker.
Thankfully, Allison's here on this tour because she was one of the key people who jumped into that fray last night. I looked over and I saw a big pile pretty quickly, and there was Allison right in the middle of it. I would expect nothing less.
All right, well, here's the video. You can see a 43-year-old man charging Zeldin on stage with a sharp object, repeatedly saying, quote, "You're done," as he was tackled to the ground. A suspect was charged with second-degree attempted assault, which is a felony. Joining us now is NBC's Kathy Park. Kathy, the attacker was charged with a non-violent felony, and under New York laws, judges cannot set bail on that charge. But it's reignited this conversation about the state's public safety laws, which Zeldin has made a focal point of his campaign, right?
Yeah, Tom, that is absolutely right. This law has essentially been in effect here in the state of New York since 2020. And as you saw there, you know, the man is lunging toward Zeldin. However, because of the law that is in effect here in the state of New York, this was a non-violent felony. And the suspect, who has now been identified as David Jacobonis, was essentially arrested, arraigned, and released hours after the attack. And Zeldin has certainly been a vocal critic of this law and tweeted this shortly after the incident took place. He wrote, in part, "After being charged with a felony for last night's attack, the man who tried to stab me was instantly released back onto the street due to New York's insane cashless bail law. We must repeal cashless bail in New York." So obviously there, the candidate is using the incident that happened yesterday to kind of pump up this initiative as he moves forward with his campaign.
Yeah, and he is back on the campaign trail. So has he given us any hint about what was going through his mind when the attacker came on stage?
Yeah, so Tom, it's pretty incredible when you look at that video that this situation didn't take a more dramatic turn, right? So he had a press conference earlier today, and he said he noticed a couple of things. He noticed that the man who approached him on the stage was an Army veteran because he had that hat on that identified him that way. He also had a weapon in his hand, and it looked like he was lunging toward him and lunging toward his throat. So this is how he decided to react. Take a listen.
The first thought was to grab onto his wrist and just to hold it, because there were so many people around that I would expect there to be help quickly. And that's what happened.
And Tom, we should point out that it was important for Zeldin to go back onto the stage and finish his remarks, which he ended up doing. But as you noted earlier, he said that he will be ramping up security from here on out. Tom?
Yeah, again, he was not injured. President Biden today released a statement. He says he condemns the attack and that violence has no place in our society or politics. So have police determined a motive yet? Do we know anything about this guy's motive?
Yeah, so Tom, that really is a big question at this time, because when you listen to some of the video clips that were captured, you hear him mouthing, "You are done, you are done." So right now it's still unclear why Zeldin was a target, what may have motivated him to do something like this at a public event in front of dozens of people. And right now NBC News has tried to reach out to him, but fortunately we have not heard back. Tom? All
right, Kathy, thank you very much. Kathy Park in New York. Let's get you over now to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Pat Benatar says she will not sing "Hit Me With Your Best Shot" on her tour. Now, she's on tour right now, but this is because of so many mass shootings across the country. The rock star is touring through September. She says she's unable to sing the words, I should say, with a smile on her face, and wants the respect for the families of the victims to be in place. The song was released in 1980, became her first top 10 on the Billboard 100. Number 2, and that is that WWECE. Vince McMahon is retiring as chief. I see what that's supposed to say, CEO. Vince McMahon is retiring, we should say, as chief of his position there with the World Wrestling Federation. He stepped back from his leadership role a month ago amid allegations of sexual misconduct. McMahon is by far the best known promoter of professional wrestling in the country. Earlier this month, we told you about the Wall Street Journal report, which said that he paid more than $12 million to 4 women to cover claims of sexual misconduct and infidelity. Number 3, a UK judge ruled Prince Harry can sue the UK government, over its security plan. Harry said that he and his wife Meghan lost publicity-funded UK police protection when they stepped down from their royal duties and moved to the U.S. Now, the prince wants to pay for his own personal security when he visits the UK. The lawsuit challenges the UK's government refusal to permit that. Number 4, Disney will replace fairy godmothers at parks with more gender-neutral apprentices. This goes especially for cast members at dress-up boutiques who help kids transform into their favorite Disney character. The park website said the change will help the park become more inclusive for cast members who might not identify as female. Number 5, the Mega Million jackpot for tonight's drawing is now set. $660 million. This is the nation's 9th largest jackpot. And the number is so large because nobody has won in 3 months. All right, coming up, some polio concerns tonight after the first case in almost 10 years popped up in New York. The warning from state officials. And frustrated travelers say they have been dealing with baggage nightmares at airports, especially in Europe. What you should do if you have a long planned trip overseas this summer. Health officials in New York State set up some vaccine clinics today for people who have not been vaccinated against polio. And they're warning doctors to be on the lookout for new cases because yesterday they announced that they have detected the first reported case of polio in the U.S. in nearly a decade. The patient lives in Rockland County, about 30 miles north of Manhattan. Officials there say he started showing symptoms about a month ago and then developed paralysis. The last time polio was brought into the United States by travelers was back in 1993. And the last time the virus actually originated in the U.S., back in 1979. NBC's Erica Edwards joins us now. Erica, talk us through some of the details here. Do we know how this person got polio?
Hi, Tom. You know, health officials in New York really aren't providing many details about this patient, really to protect this person's identity. We know in general, polio virus can spread multiple ways through respiration or saliva or fecal matter. Now, health officials in New York did give us a few clues yesterday in a statement saying this case is indicative of a transmission chain from an individual who received the oral polio vaccine. That's important. Stay with me here, which is no longer authorized or administered in the U.S., where only the inactivated polio vaccine has been given since 2000. Now, here's what that means. That means that the strain of polio this person contracted likely came from outside of the U.S., from an area that still uses that oral polio vaccine. We have not used that here in the States for at least 2 decades because, sadly, it can sometimes actually cause the virus. Doctors say, or the illness, I should say, doctors say that the vaccines in use right now are very, very safe and highly effective. Tom?
Well, the vaccination rates are already pretty high, right? The CDC is reporting that about 93% of 2-year-olds have received at least 3 doses of polio vaccine, and the chances of getting polio if you've been vaccinated are actually pretty low.
So, right, that's right. I mean, the vaccine that was introduced here in the U.S. in 1955 has been so successful that polio was largely eradicated by the late 70s. Most American kids now do get the polio vaccine in order to attend public schools. However, there are pockets of the country still with much lower vaccination rates, including in Rockland County, New York, where this polio patient was identified yesterday. Vaccination rates among 2-year-olds there in that county hover around 60%.
All right, so if you are not vaccinated, how contagious is this?
Polio virus is very contagious, and infected people can spread the virus even if they're not feeling sick, if they're not experiencing any symptoms. Now, usually it causes flu-like symptoms, and rare circumstances can cause paralysis, even death. However, we know that that's really only in unvaccinated or under-vaccinated individuals. The CDC says that kids need 4 doses of the polio vaccine. In adults, that's 3 shots. Tom?
You know, I knew somebody who had polio because he contracted it as a kid in Panama and paralyzed. So it is serious stuff. Erica, thank you. Appreciate your time and your expertise. Coming up, some parents are still having a hard time finding baby formula, even though shipments continue to arrive from Europe. and 4,000 beagles rescued from a breeder. The work it took to get the place shut down and whether Snoopy is among those little guys coming up in the local. NBC covers hundreds of stories each day, and because you nor I could possibly read, watch, or listen to all of them, our bureau teams have done it for all of us. This is what they tell us we need to be watching, what's going down in their regions. It's a segment we call The Local. From our West Coast Bureau, California Governor Gavin Newsom signing a set of new gun safety bills that requires more regulations on gun sales and dealers. One of the 8 laws includes a 10-year prohibition on gun possession if somebody has been convicted of child or elder abuse. Additional laws signed focus on restricting where guns and other parts can be sold. From our Northeast Bureau, police in Pennsylvania responded to a call about a 28-year-old man who was in cardiac arrest with a snake wrapped tightly around his neck. That'll do it. When police arrived at the scene, the man was lying on the ground, unresponsive, with his pet snake around his neck until an officer fired a single shot at the snake's head. The man was rushed to the hospital. No word on how he's doing. From our Southeast Bureau, 4,000 beagles were rescued from a Virginia breeding facility and are now up for adoption at local animal shelters. Look at that guy. One rescue organization shared these photos and videos of the dogs after they arrived. The state senators responsible for their rescue crafted a suite of bills, maybe even a suit of bills, called Beagle Bills, which resulted in the facility's closure. Can we just hang on that video for a while? Yeah. To add on to all of the travel chaos that we've been seeing the last few months, we are now hearing from a flyer who says trying to get his checked luggage back has been a nightmare. I talked to this military retiree who traveled to Scotland for his dream golf trip. He'd been saving up for a long time. He decided to bring some prized possessions, his golf clubs and bag, and then a putter as well that his son had given him. 2 months after his trip, they're still sitting in a Birmingham, UK warehouse. Listen to his story.
I, tracked my golf clubs for the entire 10 days we're there. They were all over. They went from all the way up to Aberdeen, down into middle of England, then back up to Glasgow, back to Edinburgh. They just traveled the country. They got to see more of Scotland than I did, actually.
Okay, so here's the deal. He left out of Newark Airport. His golf clubs didn't, and so he still doesn't have them. You can watch my full report tonight, NBC Nightly News at 6:30 Eastern. This luggage chaos is all over Europe. We're going to give you some tips on how you can avoid this type of mess if you're going to Europe or even just here in the United States. All right, now we want to bring you today's original with in-depth reporting on a topic we have been keeping an eye on. As we mentioned earlier, President Biden has signed the Formula Act into law. It's a bipartisan bill that suspends tariffs on baby formula imports through the end of the year. Now, it'll hopefully make imported formula cheaper to buy. Good news for the parents who can find it at all. NBC's Isa Gutierrez has the story.
Week after week, Operation Fly Formula shipments have landed at U.S. airports. By Sunday, the federal program expects to have delivered enough formula for over 60 million 8-ounce bottles to the U.S. from overseas. Places like Singapore, Switzerland, and the U.K., to name a few. But the shortage isn't over. Experts tell us that could still be months away.
If you don't think this is an issue, check your local grocery store.
On Tuesday, Mandy Hansen from Indianapolis got down to 10 ounces of formula.
That would last her basically an evening.
Her daughter, Magnolia, is 6 months old and allergic to milk protein. She says she hits 5 stores around town regularly with no luck. But when she does find more than a couple bottles,
I feel like I hit the lottery. Like, I feel like I've just found the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's like, oh my goodness, I finally, I'm going to be able to last 6 days without having to worry about how I'm going to feed my baby. But, 3 days later, I'm like, oh, I'm back in this panic mode again.
Desperate for help this week, Hansen posted on Facebook.
I even made it public so maybe people would share to try to help us out.
She's received 10 bottles since her post, but she worries for others.
Most people are having to resort to still pretty dramatic lengths to get formula. In some cases, even in cities, having to drive up to 80 miles just to be able to find a place that actually dispenses their particular brand of formula that might be at a discount or even at cost through special programs like women, infants, and children. And then in rural areas, I've heard of patients that have to travel hours.
Operation Fly Formula is one of the White House's efforts to combat the shortage, also easing import rules for foreign manufacturers and invoking federal emergency rules to prioritize domestic production. Glenn Kepke has worked in supply chain for over 20 years.
The White House efforts have helped slightly, but what we need is the manufacturers to continue to ramp up production and get to a stable state. We're anticipating this to continue for at least another 2 months.
Like, it shouldn't be this way. Our children should be the first and forefront of everybody's mind.
All right. Thank you, Issa, for that report. Earlier this week, after months of criticism, FDA Commissioner Robert Califf spoke out about the agency's handling of the baby formula shortage and also its recent e-cigarette review. And in a statement, the commissioner asked the FDA to review its food and tobacco programs, writing, quote, fundamental questions about the structure, function, funding, and leadership need to be addressed. Coming up, Meta is making big changes on Instagram and Facebook just to keep up with the popularity of TikTok. More on the big tech competition after the break. You may have noticed your Facebook app is looking a little different these days. Less like Facebook, more like TikTok. Its feed is kind of being split in two. There's a new home section of mostly videos chosen just for you based on what the algorithm thinks you'd like to see. And then there's the other section called Feeds. This looks more like the old Facebook, where you'll see posts from family and friends and the groups that you're a part of. In a statement, the company said the changes would give users a way to customize and control your experience further. It's the latest example of Meta-owned products starting to really try to look a lot more like TikTok. So what is TikTok doing about all this? What does it think? An exec from the company told CNBC that it's fully aware of Meta's moves and that TikTok isn't interested in mimicking Facebook. A short time ago, I spoke with Kaylin Rosenflat about all of this. So, Callan, this latest update with video content tailored to you in a separate tab is basically TikTok's For You page, right? So what does this say about where Meta is at right now?
Well, Tom, I think it shows that Meta is really feeling the fire from TikTok's success. You know, earlier this year, TikTok was the #1 downloaded app worldwide. As recently as May, there's research that shows that it will continue to be the #1 downloaded app worldwide. And behind that is Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, all of Meta's properties. So they know that they have heavy competition with TikTok, and they're trying to figure out how do they fit into a social media landscape that puts TikTok at the top spot and that puts them, you know, further down in the top 10. So they're really feeling the heat. And I think this move just shows how much competition TikTok has put against Meta.
Okay, so to that point, TikTok saw about a 45% jump in its own user base from last year, but Facebook still has more users. Do you get a sense that this strategy of trying to copy them is going to work at all for Facebook?
Well, that's a great question, and the answer is yes and no, because we've seen copycat features like Instagram story features, which was cribbed from Snapchat. That was wildly successful for Instagram. It did phenomenal. It brought users in. It was a really popular tool. But we're also seeing on the flip side, Instagram's most recent update being a huge flop among users. It's tried to copy TikTok in having a full screen version of itself, essentially, where the pictures and the video take up the full screen in the same way that it does on TikTok. And users are loathing this. There's some users who are saying that they're no longer going to use the app. I've talked with people who say that they don't even open Instagram anymore. So when it comes to copying, it's really about keeping the original intention of the product. People are using the product for a reason while adding features that kind of help user experience. And it seems like in this case, the most recent copycat feature from Instagram, for example, has not been a success, but we've seen successes in the past. So it's really about walking this super fine line and not upsetting your user base.
Well, okay, to that point, Facebook is still holding on to part of what it originally was, right? It was a social network where you could connect with family and friends, people you haven't seen in a long time. And there's a spot to see posts in chronological order, like the site used to have, rather. Is there just not as much value to that anymore? I'll tell you, for folks who are over 30 or 40, like myself, that's why we go on Facebook, to reconnect with family and friends from, decades ago.
Absolutely. And to some degree, like, people do want to see the chronological timeline. And I think it's a really smart feature to have that available. However, it's scary how well these algorithms know us and how well they know what we want to see. And when it comes to an app like TikTok, it's all algorithm based. It's all fed to you based on your preferences. And so I think when some people go and see a chronological timeline, they're going to be a little bit like, where's the things that I love to see? And they might be a little more boring than they anticipate.
Callan Rosenblatt, thank you very much. Good reporting. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is a wrap for us at this hour. We're going to have much more for you on Monday, same time, same place. Coverage, though, resumes right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.